Hello, everyone, and welcome to Student Affairs Unplugged, Thriving Off Campus. My name is Dr. Adam Spolsky. I'm the CEO and founder of transform.forward, a change management strategy consulting and executive coaching agency. We'll talk a little bit more about my background later in the session. Before we get started with our speakers, I did just want to do a little bit of housekeeping for this session. As we go through the session, just know that it will be recorded and made available on the website as well as YouTube. If you are in need of closed captioning, please use Google Chrome and enable live captioning in your settings. Otherwise, the recordings will have captioning available on them auto-generated by YouTube. Throughout the session, you're more than welcome to ask questions or comment for the presenters. Just know that if you don't want your name associated with your comment and question, please indicate that when you ask it, and we will make sure that we don't have your name pop up along with your question. We'll just ask it to the presenters. Before I introduce the presenters, I want to share a little bit of background to this session and the month events in general. While October has traditionally been Careers in Student Affairs Month, we've observed a growing interest in roles beyond campus. So in a lighthearted pivot, we've introduced careers outside of Student Affairs Month. This isn't meant to be shady toward the original, but instead to highlight how you can use the same skills that you learned on campus supporting students in off-campus ways, or use those skills you honed as a student affairs practitioner in other fields. This month was designed for you and with you. Hundreds of you liked and commented on social media posts, recommending topics, speakers. We're excited about this discussion in particular, as often we are hearing about ed tech and consulting and what do those mean and what do those look like. And we hope to continue these discussions beyond just October. But now let's get to the folks you're here to engage with. I want to let the speakers introduce themselves, but I'll give you a little bit of background about each of our presenters and how we are connected. Hi, Anna and Martise. How are you?
Hi.
Great.
Hello.
Hi, good to be with you all.
Yes.
So Anna and I met almost 15 years ago, a little scary to think about, when we both worked at Illinois Institute of Technology, the Stewart School of Business in Chicago. Anna was actually my supervisor. And after I left IIT, I joined a growing ed tech company to help them with their growth in leadership. That's where I met Martise. While at that ed tech, Martise was a client of mine. And as time evolved, I had to turn my attention more toward our corporate strategy and thinking about mergers and acquisitions. So I recruited Martise to our organization as a consultant. Hopefully this shows you that you never know what will happen with the individuals in your network. It's been amazing to watch the career journeys of both of these amazing professionals flourishing in their own right, not only excelling during their time on campus, but also in their roles off campus that you're going to hear about today. So to kick it off, I'd love to hear from each of you about what were the last roles you held on campus?
And do you also want us to give just a little bit of overview as well as we lead into that?
Great. Thank you for keeping me on track.
No
First,
problem.
we'll start with some
We've got
introductions.
each other's back. 15 years.
Exactly. First, let's start with some introductions. Anna, if you want to introduce yourself first, and then Martise, we'll move to you.
Sure. Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Rossetti. I use she, her, and Aya pronouns. I'm based in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. I'm a married mother of 3, who's also part of a blended family. My partner still works in higher education, and my kids include a 14-year-old high school freshman, and a 9-year-old third grader, and a 5-year-old kindergartner. Other identities that are important to me are that I'm an immigrant to the United States. I identify as multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multilingual. So those are some of the things that are important to me. Over to you, Martise.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Martise Cooks. I currently reside in Dallas, Texas. I identify as a gay African-American male. And I forgot what else were we supposed to and then I would just say other things that are important to me is just important sense of connectedness to the culture of who I identify as. And then I have 2 fur babies here as my children.
Awesome. And just to round that out, like I said, my name's Adam Spolsky. I'm originally from Chicago, but I now reside in Boulder, Colorado, with my partner and our two fur babies. He is a medical professional, so no clue what we do in higher education or really what we do in general as it relates to supporting higher education. But he's been there and he's done that, so he gets it from a student perspective. And I have spent a considerable amount of time in my career, both in on-campus roles and off-campus roles that we'll talk about. So regarding on-campus roles, what was the last role that each of you held on a college campus? Martise, let's start with you.
Yeah, so my last role on campus was coordinator of student organizations at DePaul University. So in that role, I got to manage 300 and over 300 student organizations. And I also serve as the project manager for software for student engagement on campus for the division. And that's how I got connected with Adam, because he was our consultant for that software.
Awesome. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, my last on-campus role was as Assistant Dean of Academic and Student Affairs at the Stewart School of Business at Illinois Tech in Chicago, where Adam and I met.
Awesome. And then I left SMU in Dallas, Texas earlier this year. I spent 8 years as their Chief of Staff and Assistant Vice President for Student Engagement and Success. We love a long title in higher education. But that primarily was overseeing all of the central services for Division of Student Affairs, marketing, technology, assessment, etc. And then anything that would be related to student engagement and success, your typical involvement, DEI work, community engagement, parent and family programs, all the fun stuff. And then have moved into this full time. So I'm curious from both of your perspectives, moving off campus is a conscious choice. There's a lot to think about. There's an identity, I think, that we hold, especially as student affairs practitioners. What was the catalyst, or what kind of got you thinking about potentially moving off campus?
Martise, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. For me, I think it was just, I saw my career advancing faster than where it was at the time, because I really was at the point in my last role ready to take on an assistant director role, and the opportunity just wasn't presenting itself. So I think after being heavily recruited to work for an ed tech company and helping me to really get more confident in saying, hey, you're doing this work already, perhaps you can do this for other colleges. So in myself, I saw it as a different sector of student affairs versus being directly in it, because I was still connected to the profession, still was able to help other campuses do the exact same work, but in a different capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, the impetus was a desire for a bit of a change as well. I had been at Illinois Tech for just about 10 years in different and progressive roles, and the portfolio expanded and kept me curious and interested in learning new things, which is always something that was important to me. But ultimately, it was really a time where I felt like my curiosity about the field and the kinds of aspects of the impact of higher education that most interested me felt very limiting to be at one institution and subject to the same sort of issues and constraints, to kind of continue to expand my understanding of the things that I was interested in. But, similar to Martise, I wanted to be able to have my career growth and my compensation and all of that sort of match what I felt my skills were and what I thought I could contribute. I have a young family, so I certainly have other goals that I wanted to achieve. And it really was challenging to meet all of the needs of my family situation, being in a campus role at that time with a long commute and everything else. So I had also just completed a doctorate, which was really a personal objective that was really meaningful to me, given my history and my family background. It was something that was an achievement that was really for me foremost. And that experience just gave me such a broad perspective on the field of higher education and different types of institutions. And I just felt like I couldn't imagine myself going back to one institution and being able to continue to learn the things that I want to learn and have the impact I wanted to have in one place. And so that's where I started exploring, different ways to do that.
And I think I really resonate with what you just said about, wanting that experience of more than one place. I think for me, I loved the idea of being able to work with more than one institution and not sort of sitting in one organization particularly. I think also when I pivoted, I was in my early 20s, and the idea of being part of a leadership team of an ed tech startup was something that, was an adventure. I wanted to, I have a really high risk threshold in terms of life choices, as they both probably know. So for me, it was worth a shot, right? So I moved across the country. I wanted to do something different that I had never done. And I wanted it still to be connected. I wasn't willing to just take a blind leap, but so it was still very higher education focused, but it allowed me to work with hundreds of campuses on different initiatives and understand what it was like to run a business and all of the drama that went with learning that as a bootstrap startup. And so for me, it was really about that exposure. I wasn't sure how slowly I would advance in higher education. And for me at that time, that was really important to me to have that go quicker. I came from a really lower socioeconomic status family, and I wanted to be able to pay my bills. I mentioned this
and
on a
do better than that, I think, right? And even better, like thrive, right? Not survive, thrive. Yeah.
Yes.
I really
I would say both of you have brought up the more economic status, and that definitely was a good determining factor, because I was similar to Adam, very come from a low social background in terms of income. And then once I learned the possibility of how much additional income that I will be able to have, that's what was highly attractive. But because I know for me, I felt it was a huge risk, but not that much of a risk, because again, as Adam highlighted, it was more, I'm still working with institutions and still doing that piece, but hey, I can get paid this much, and it would have taken me a long time to get that pay raise of where my career path was going.
And Adam, I know we're going to get into the specifics of those pivots, but I pivoted to two different industries since leaving my on-campus job, and also pivoted to what ended up being kind of a startup, but within, a different industry. And so that was a big risk, and something that at the time had the mix of like excitement as well, but the transferability of the things that I had learned, the experience that I had gained. And so I think, like both of you, while we were willing to take a risk to switch to something different, there was still that foundation of being able to bring with us the knowledge, the skills, and the experience that we had that was directly applicable, as opposed to having to make like a really, shaky translation between the two.
Yeah, that is a perfect segue. Tell us a little bit about your pivots, Anna, and sort of what did you land into first, and what's happened since then?
Yeah. It's been interesting as I reflect back on that the one went like very micro and then went very macro. I really had an unexpected and great opportunity to go into the nonprofit philanthropic sector, where I served as director of a fellowship program at the Aspen Institute that worked particularly with college students from communities that had experienced intergenerational disenfranchisement and lack of opportunity, and sort of structural support for persistence and completion and career transition. And our program worked very much hand in hand with communities to determine how the resources and networks of Aspen could come in to sort of bridge some of those gaps and support those young people and their households in again, persistence, completion, and then career transition, and to really recognize their value and the cultural capital in those communities, and let that really open up opportunities for young people who wouldn't otherwise have it. I'm sure if you're joining this call that mission probably resonates deeply with all of you, so you can see why I jumped at the chance to be any part of that. You know, moving into philanthropy, I thought would be very similar, right? Not higher ed is nonprofit as well. They're incredibly different. And higher education, you know, continues to be just this really unique environment. And I think it's not until you leave it that you realize how unique it is and how the specialized knowledge that you have about higher education is actually potentially an asset if you're interested in building on that. So for me, that the mission of the fellowship that I had the opportunity to work with resonated very deeply with my dissertation research, which was all about the experiences of college students of color at historically white institutions and connected to leadership development and all stereotype threat and all these factors that I think were really something that I felt very passionate about. So I went into like a direct service situation. So I was doing broad program management in a multi-site fellowship across the country, a lot of program and project management work, a lot of operations, a lot of logistics and strategy. But I worked very closely with the fellows and their families. And we did a lot of direct service during the pandemic that really served to uplift like individual households during a very difficult time. As we all know, startups are intense. It's churn and burn. And there came a point where, you know, we had achieved certain things and it seemed like the right time to hand over that operation to people that wanted to take it to the next level. Whereas I felt like I wanted a different path going forward. And so then I made the transition into consulting, which seems like a really hard pivot to go from like this philanthropic, very equity-centered sort of direct service situation to like this corporate like consulting environment. But I think context matters, right? And culture matters. And so I found a situation where it is a very relational and sort of equity-focused culture. And I'm able to bring all of those sensibilities and that equity lens into the consulting work that I do. And that's part of the reason they wanted me. And so they wanted exactly what I brought to the table. So there was not a big translation there. So I know we can get into more, but I'll pause there.
For me, my path consists of, as we shared earlier, working for that startup tech company. In that role, I was a consultant for a specific area where I got to serve many hats, as we typically do in student affairs, but now in a different capacity. So in that role as a consultant, I was responsible for the overall customer retention, as well as for certain aspects of the business side. So making sure that they will have upsell opportunity and expand the product on site, as well as also serving as that subject matter as expert into talking about the different practices on how to best leverage the software to the different areas of student affairs within the different divisions. So just helping them to learn the best ways of how they can maximize the potential of that platform on their campus, as well as playing those different roles as a consultant. And then in that role, we were acquired by our competitor at the time. And so we saw more access to resources and then continuing that role. So I was with that company for a total of 6 years. And the last role I held was as a senior consultant. And at that time, felt that there was no more growth opportunity. So after that point, I left there and went on to another software company in ed tech, but no longer higher ed focused. So it was now K through 12 on college and career readiness. So in that role, I was a consultant again, but I was having to now shift my mindset and start thinking about, hey, I have my experience in working on campus, so let me apply that into the work that I'm doing with these college career counselors and the software, because that was the heavy focus. So I got to oversee a aspect of the business for schools who will utilize that, helping them to actually implement the software, as well as, again, now seen as being more billable. So in terms of that, meaning that every district was contracted an amount of hours where I was responsible for coming up with a scope and sequence. So giving them a full-on outline on what they needed to do to make the software to be successful at their school districts, and then host and facilitate learning professional development trainings on site whenever they will want me to come onto campus. But then I was acquired again through to another company now where I'm at, Power School. Before that role, I had something else. I forgot about that. I was promoted into a different sector of the business called for product marketing, where I was responsible for now serving as the voice of the customer, but actually articulating that to the business. So as the product marketing for the voice of the customer, so the customers who are doing that, I was responsible to articulating to the sales teams, hey, this is how you need to appeal to this audience because this is how they're seeing the product and how they need to utilize it. And in that role, I also served as the leader for our customer advisory boards. So these were strategically identified individuals throughout the country's superintendents and then chief level executives, where they served on our board of advisors. And so I will facilitate that meeting on behalf of the company with our CEO. So then I was acquired by our company now, Power School. And now I serve as the senior manager of customer advocacy, kind of doing a combination of all of those roles wrapped up to one, which we could talk about later.
So similar to both Anna and Martise, I've also had multiple pivots. One difference is that I've pivoted on and off campus and fluctuated between the two. So originally when I left IIT, I was working with the leadership team of our startup. As we moved forward with that organization, I did our product marketing, our sales enablement, all of our research. We were hoping to get acquired or to merge with another organization. So figuring out what it looked like, our value propositions, all that kind of fun stuff, as well as the general marketing for the organization and overseeing, what we would call strategic accounts. So either big names or folks who were using the product in a completely new and unique way that we wanted to make sure they had sort of a white glove treatment. As we went through that, Martise mentioned that we merged. Multiple companies were purchased by the same investment company, and we were merged together. And so after about a year and a half of that, I really started to think about what did I want next. I didn't think it was still in the ed tech space. I wanted something that was a little bit more mission driven. I also knew that I wanted my doctorate degree. And one thing that I always tell people is do not pay for a degree. Right? So find a program or an organization that's going to help contribute to that. And so I actually went to a doctoral info session at SMU, and they were like, hey, are you looking for a job? And I was like, not really, but why? It turns out that they had a new vice president who was really trying to figure out what the new division for the Division of Student Affairs was going to look like. And I ended up joining them to be their chief of staff, figure out a new strategic plan. I was only planning on staying there as long as I needed to complete a degree and to sort of get some experience and then think about what was next. I was doing the internal battle that I think a lot of us did was, do I want to be a vice president for student affairs? Do I want to do something else? Unfortunately, the vice president passed away within her first year in the role from a pretty aggressive form of cancer. 8 years later, I was still at SMU. We recruited a really great VP to take her place. Shout out to him. He was just named a pillar of the profession. But also thinking about my role evolved so much while I was there, and we were doing so many innovative things. I think once COVID hit, a lot changed for a lot of people, but it also caused me to think about values a little bit. My partner and I had been long distance for several years while he was finishing residency and fellowship. We knew that with him being in the medical professional and a same-sex couple, with the way that Texas politics were going, that was not a viable home for us. And we had to figure out what that was like. I did all the things you were supposed to do. I talked to mentors. I talked to folks in the field. I went to different aspirational conferences and ultimately decided that it wasn't a career path in higher education. I had been doing consulting and coaching on the side, and I loved it. It was what filled my cup. It was where I got my passion more than my day-to-day on a campus. And so made the decision to migrate into that fully. And we'll talk about what we all do currently and what those projects look like. But that really sort of helped solidify for me that I still absolutely want to support higher education and the success of students. I just don't need to be on a campus to do that.
Yep.
So, and I know that's something that's been central to all of us at different points, talking about how we innovate, how we better serve our stakeholders and our students, and thinking about it now. We still have stakeholders. We still have folks that we are helping be successful. But for both of you, what do projects look like when you work with campus partners? What is your day-to-day? What does the stakeholder engagement look like now in your current roles? Martise, do you want to kick us off for this one?
Sure. So for me and my role as senior manager of customer advocacy, I'm primarily responsible for overseeing what we have in our structure is our council level engagement. So that speaks to something where you were saying more strategic accounts and giving them that white glove service. So I oversee an aspect of our business where members of our community, or AKA Power School champions, are excited, and I've deemed the phrase as solution enthusiasts, but at the council level, they get to participate in exclusive opportunities with our chief executive officer, as well as our chief product and innovation officer. So it's kind of facilitating what those experiences and opportunities for them to engage with them looks like, as well as overseeing kind of aspects of what we call our user groups. So think of user groups sort of like a student organization on campus, where a group of people are coming together because they have a special interest in a particular area. So I kind of manage and oversee all of those across the globe now, because we do have some international groups now. So I oversee that process for the company as a whole, as well as managing a person who oversees that regular engagement opportunities for the people who are part of the champion program.
Anna, what do projects look like for you? And I think this will be a good contrast for folks to see what does a large consulting group do versus an independent one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things that I really, really enjoy about the work I get to do now is that, I get to work with decision makers on campus to navigate change, to implement initiatives, to make decisions. And that will vary across institution types, the different vested parties that are involved, and the actual substance of the project. And so I've worked on 13-month projects, and I've worked on 12-week assessments, and they really vary greatly. It's not for everyone, but I love the variety, and I love being able to dive into a new project and quickly come up to speed and learn pretty quickly what needs to be done, and then really feel like I have the opportunity to make an impact kind of on that macro level. And so it kind of helps me do mission-centric work, but to spread that impact across multiple institutions or clients or vested parties. And so the projects can vary, and I'll give a few examples. A large, sort of elite selective R1 sought us out to, as part of a reorganization of their student health and well-being, to really help them bring that reorganization and opportunity for students and learners to access student health and well-being services in a comprehensive and holistic and accessible way, help them to select and implement an electronic health record. I didn't know anything about electronic health records other than logging into my own patient portal, myself. But that project, while ostensibly it was about implementing an EHR, it was not about that, right? That's not what I brought to the table. What I brought to the table was how to help, a vice provost navigate the internal politics and change of a reorganization, how to help them navigate each of the units and different vested parties in that organization feel heard and valued, how to look out for risks, how to help them structure decision making, how to be inclusive in the process, how to thoroughly vet the different vendors and options in an objective and thoughtful way. And to be clear, I think oftentimes in consulting, there's a sense that like we're bringing this like magical set of insights and skills to the table. And while I think the biggest thing is that we have the ability to focus and devote our time and our energy to a project in a way that campus professionals cannot, by virtue of the fact that they have an entire job to do. It's not that, we also have some objectivity, hopefully. We also have access through perhaps certainly in a larger consulting firm, a number of other engagements that we've done that we can draw from, benchmarking data across the industry. So there certainly are some things that we have access to that the campus professional wouldn't, but we also have the luxury of being able to focus and devote ourselves completely to that project. And that level of focus and customization to the client is something that is very difficult for a campus professional to achieve. We've all been assigned to an initiative at a campus on top of all of our roles and hats that we wear. And it's incredibly challenging to be able to do it the way that, to the level that we would want, right? Another example of a project would be a small, but fortunately growing regional institution that needed an assessment of one of their functional departments. Happened to be a registrar's office, which is an area that I had experience in many, many years ago, early in my career, and never thought would be relevant again. And turns out that was very relevant, and I was one of the only people that had that experience. And so I got on the project and was able to contribute to an assessment that allowed them to understand the organizational challenges and the functional issues in that unit's organization, and we were able to provide some insights. So that was mixed methods research. It was interviews and qualitative analysis. It was quantitative, looking at data and analyzing various metrics and other performance indicators of their business, and being able to bring that together in a sort of mixed methods way with pretty slides and be able to share with them some insights that they would have taken probably a few years to figure out. And by then, the inputs would have changed, right? We combined that with benchmarking insights and did a whole bunch of really fun interviews with people in similar positions at different institutions. I mean, I really enjoyed doing all of that. I thought it was fascinating and inspiring to kind of understand the different contexts across institutions everywhere. And it really provided major value to that client because they couldn't possibly have replicated that work in the span of a few weeks the way that we did. So there are more examples, but those are two examples of a 13-month journey with a client versus like a 10, 12-week assessment.
That's helpful. You bring up a really great point that I think we sometimes live out in student affairs is good work is rewarded with more work. So the more that you perform, the more that gets added to your plate without potentially a raise or a title change. My organization works on very similar projects to Anna, but obviously we are a much smaller organization. And by saying we, it's me as the sole full-time person and about 9 part-time individuals who are mostly folks who are still holding roles within higher education or have their own consultancies. A couple examples of some projects. We are currently working with a large flagship university on a dual project. One is a strategic plan. And so working with them on the whole strategic planning process, including what it looks like to launch, implement, and monitor that plan moving forward. Combined with that, my organization does executive coaching. So we've been hired to do executive coaching. I curated a team of coaches for their entire leadership team. And so that's a way that we are combining the people leadership element with the organizational changes that need to happen We've also worked with a small liberal arts institution who was having some financial difficulty, and they needed to combine some functional areas. And so they combined what was student affairs, student success, and DEI into one division. And so we designed what that organization would look like in terms of its structure, its allocation of personnel, budgeting, etc. So very similar things. Similar to Anna, we're typically working with longer term engagements. We do some assessments or program review from the higher ed folks kind of language of looking at specific functional areas. And then we also have a training and facilitation predominantly focused around change management. So how to help groups and organizations lead through change. So I want to get to some of the questions that have been asked because they're really great questions. And I think they really get at some of the things we were hoping to be able to address during this webinar. One of them is the volatility of the workplace in non-higher education settings. So Angela asked, she can't help but feel like there is less security and consistency in jobs outside of higher ed. We've all had a portfolio of jobs after departing higher ed. How dangerous is pivoting?
I actually feel more secure in my role, believe it or not, because I've heard of some of my friends who are still in the field maybe have lost their jobs just due to one, that the field has changed and there's no longer a direct need or is not that much of a priority of their institutions that they've been at for a long time. So some of them might have been not forced out of their position, but kind of seen it as an opportunity to retire early or just say, you know what, I can shift into something else. So I think, and the only reason that I've pivoted now in my current career path is just due because of acquisitions. And that first role that I had with this software company, I was there for 6 years. And so now I'm heading into this company now where I've been there, including my acquisition years, is about 4, almost 5 years. So I've been pretty safe.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question and something that I hear a lot, when I talk to folks that are thinking about the pivot. And this is obviously very contextual, and each situation and each pivot, of course, has its own context. So that's important to say. But I also think, like Martise said, things have changed in the field. We know that there's an enrollment cliff that we've been warned about for many years. Things are starting to really come to fruition. We've got institutional closures. There's a contraction happening in higher ed, and a lot of institutions, in order to navigate decreases in that enrollment market, are going to have to either merge, they're going to have to contract, they're going to have to, close, unfortunately. And we know there are constraints to contraction on the faculty and academic and program side. So the staff roles at institutions are unfortunately the ones that are going to be more volatile in the next few years. So I do think that these are some changes that in many ways have been accelerated by COVID. COVID funds maybe stave that off for a little bit, but that's really going to be something that we see in the next few years. And so while I think that there's a level of stability and some other benefits that people felt they could enjoy working in higher education, that was sort of they felt was a trade-off. Like, maybe I'll make a little less, but it'll be much more stable and I'll have all these great benefits. I think we've really seen a lot of those benefits erode. And I think given the fact that higher ed salaries have not kept pace with cost of living and other issues, not to mention how people are really thinking about the value proposition about their work life and their other aspects of their life differently, we're really seeing that calculus doesn't really bear out as much as it did. There's no question that in a for-profit industry, there are some very specific inputs and outputs that determine whether folks, people are retained, layoffs, et cetera. All of that is happening. And there's some sectors, ed tech in particular, where there's some volatility there that we've seen. We've also seen layoffs in certain consulting firms. So it's not to say that these things don't happen, but we've also seen layoffs in higher ed. I've talked to someone today. So it's not, I think we have to question that narrative has really changed. That had been very much, I think, a strong expectation. However, I would say that when you then work in an industry where you're seeing more equitable compensation, you're seeing more clear and explicit growth trajectories. I know in being in a larger organization, I have a very clear understanding of what I need to do and what the path is. If my performance is where it needs to be, and I know exactly how that's measured, and I know exactly what I need to do, then it's very clear how I can progress. And that's more clarity than I've ever had about my growth potential in higher education. So there is really no opportunity to have no risk. And I think that's what we need to remember, is that higher education is no longer this sort of safe cocoon. But I think it's a question of, you got to work with the information you have at the time and decide how you weigh those different risk factors, and what are you really giving up versus what might you gain, and then decide what your own risk tolerance is, and what that then results in terms of the assets that you have and the benefits that you have. So it's definitely a tough question, but I do think things have changed.
Yeah, I would say to also just add a little bit more to that is just to make sure at the end of the day, you know what your non-negotiables are at anything. So knowing this, because for me, I needed to make sure that the dollar amount was right, or that I still had these particular opportunities available in whatever opportunity. So as long as I had a clear non-negotiable set of that going into these areas, then that's what I think has been more beneficial and successful for me and what I've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that is a fear we hear a lot of times of, I hear about 10% layoffs, 5% layoffs in the corporate space. We just may call them furloughs in higher education, or we may treat them differently. They don't get as much news traffic because unless you're a higher name institution, it's not that newsworthy. So it's like Anna said, it's happening in higher education. You're probably just not hearing about it in the same way. And I think you have to think about, it affects different kinds of industries differently. So product-based industries have been affected differently than service-based industries. And, if you're relying on continual growth of your clientele base versus more projects, like that's a different kind of metric system for organizations to be measuring against. And so you want to think about that as you're exploring what it looks like to join other organizations.
Mm-hmm.
But another question that we got was, it's been hard to get interviews, let alone a job outside of higher education. How did we all learn about the positions that we've held in the past outside of higher education?
Utilizing that network, because it started with you, Adam. And then for this second role, honestly, LinkedIn was my best friend. Looking for a job is a job itself. So you just need to set aside that time and then just do what you got to do to just be on the hunt. But that's kind of what helped me, was utilizing my network of professionals, and then LinkedIn is what found my other opportunities.
Yeah, I was is really the network as well. I when I was considering, both of my pivots were sort of a personal connection. One, I was recruited specifically by someone who'd been in my network a long time, and then the other was, again, an exploratory set of conversations with people in my network when I was even deciding what it is that I could do. And to be perfectly transparent, I hadn't even considered consulting and realized I didn't quite really understand what it really entailed. I think I had an idea in my head, but post-COVID consulting has changed a lot, especially in terms of the work-life integration aspect, which I think we'd probably touch on. But it was those conversations that led me to connect with other people that could help me get an understanding. And look, I mean, timing and luck are unfortunately part of the equation, and it's really hard to see posts and comments from people day in and day out, with the struggle of the job search. And I have incredible empathy for what people are going through. It's a pretty desperate kind of place to be in when you're doing everything you can. But it really, I think, there's some strategy also to understanding what are the timing of different industries, because hiring processes, for example, at my firm and many consulting firms, is completely different in process, in timing, in expectations than higher ed. So if all you know is a higher ed job search, your expectations are calibrated totally differently. And so I think having the right expectations and understanding from the get-go, I think would really be helpful.
Yeah. Similarly, my pivots have predominantly been through networking or recruitment. I say that, but a lot of the folks that I coach through career coaching. One of the things that we talk a lot about is, like Martise said, there's a lot of homework involved in the job search, but there are ways to make that a little bit easier for you. There are so many sites out there that let you set up alerts. They let you, tag organizations or keywords and follow those so you're the first to know when something's posted. But similar to what other folks have said, it's about maintaining that network. And that's not to say that Anna, Martise, and I have talked every week for the last 15 years. But part of it is just, I saw this, it made me think of you. Have you seen this article? Or, somebody wins an award or has an accomplishment, and just recognizing that for them and keeping in touch in those ways. You never know what's going to trigger somebody to think about you in terms of a career opportunity. And I would say from my own business perspective, that's predominantly how I know me from the field, or they know me from a project that I worked on for a colleague of theirs. Oftentimes we use the narrative that higher education and student affairs is a small field as a weapon, but I also think we can think about it as an opportunity to be able to utilize that and rely on each other. If you know other folks who are also job searching, having active conversations about, what are you looking for? This is what I'm looking for. Let's help each other out. If we're contacted by a recruiter or we see something that matches what somebody else is looking for, that can go a really long way, because just because you're not interested in an opportunity doesn't mean a connection isn't. So let's talk about competition when it comes to applying. So Aubrey asks, oftentimes people are looking for business or MBA backgrounds, particularly in ed tech or consulting. And how do you overcome imposter syndrome to articulate your worth, skills, and abilities when there's so much competition there?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say for sure it's all about how you articulate your transferable skills. Because I can honestly say the work that I'm doing, I do not have any formal background in. My undergraduate degree is in art graphic design, and my master's in higher education. And yet I'm under the brand umbrella for a huge company overseeing part of their program. So it was all about being able to identify what the problem was and how I was able to address those, and the skills that I felt that I would be able to contribute to meeting those needs. And I think that's what has worked successfully for me.
Yeah. I think this is a very real factor of any job search. It's a very vulnerable process, and it's can be very isolating, and so it's very easy to this is a real part of how one feels. So totally appreciate this comment. I think it was helpful for me to try to approach this in a little bit more of an analytical way, and similar to what Martise shared, really think about this from a sort of problem-solving perspective, right? What is it that this organization or industry does? What is the sort of currency of, what is valued? What are the inputs that, they're looking for? What are the skills they're looking for? How is this going to apply to achieve their objectives, whether that's, making customers happy or selling work or creating solutions? Really think about how your experience and skill set fit to those specific things that they're trying to achieve. So rather than sort of thinking about it as the product is me, and that can be so imbued with so much identity and so much of the hopes and dreams, which is frankly just a very overwhelming thing to sort of reduce your full humanity and identity into marketing yourself, and really think about what is it about, how can you solve their problems? How are the things that you've done directly related? In a higher ed, resume, there are dozens of things that you would want to share that you've done, and things that you've accomplished, and things that you've been able to have an impact on. But when you're talking about roles outside of higher education, and you're not going through that like traditional career path in higher ed, you really need to sort of start with a blank slate and really think about what is it that they do, and how do you connect what you can do directly to those things, and sort of leave everything off, which I know is a kind of a painful proposition to like cut all these things off. It feels like they're your babies. And, but the reality is like, they don't need to know that about you. They really just need to know, how do you specifically solve the problems that we have? And so getting really analytical about that, and trying to take some of that emotion and identity out of the equation to an extent, so that you can really use your analytical and skills to really address that particular gap.
Yeah, because a lot of the things that we've been doing in student affairs are still applicable to the work. Budget management, working with large budgets, project management, being able to facilitate a meeting, being able to help people analyze data. I know I was never a data person until my job, but I know some people, Adam, tried to tell me like, hey, Martise, you should probably pick up on this data skill set. And so being in these roles now, I had to learn. And it's like, oh my gosh, I wish I had picked it up earlier. But now it just shows a lot of those things that if we step back, I know we change lives and helping the impact for the students. But if you think about more of the technical aspects of those jobs, you won't have those skills. So a lot of those things you've done in your day-to-day work in student affairs, now you have to look at it from a different perspective.
And I also think we oftentimes are the first one to tell ourselves, you're not qualified, or you can't do that. And we don't even give them the opportunity to tell us no, right? Like, we don't even put our name in the hat. And that's especially for people of minoritized identities, right? Somebody who looks like me, a white cisgendered male, is going to apply for everything under the sun, regardless of whether or not I'm qualified for it. And that's going to go so far in helping to build some of your confidence as well. Martise and I, over the years, have had lots of conversations about data and assessment. And he, like many people I've worked with, have said, I don't do assessment. I don't like assessment. It's not for me. But then when you ask questions, well, was that program successful? And somebody says yes or no. How did you determine that? Part of it is thinking about the ways in which your decision-making in your current roles is formative or summative assessment, right? You're just not calling it that. You're using different data points or proxies for information, but you're still conducting assessment, right? You're planning a program, but it's not about the event. It's about the operations, the logistics, the budget, like all of the other stuff that makes that happen. And that's what you focus on your resume and your interview, not about, I hosted a concert, right? Like, it's not just about that. It's about everything that went into that and to make that happen.
Yes.
Right. And in a different industry, maybe that's called key performance indicators, KPIs or performance metrics, but it's the same thing. It's those same inputs and outputs. And so I think sometimes that language can feel overwhelming or intimidating. But, it's all synonyms for a lot of the same things that you know how to do. And as long as you can sort of push past some of that intimidation and really take the time to get on Google, figure it out, like learn the terminology and, realize that it's really different names for a lot of the same things that you've done. And there's a lot of people that are less talented than you doing this work.
Yes.
I promise you.
Yeah.
I promise.
I tell the example of like how I did stuff with org registration. All of that now is pretty much exactly what I do, but on a whole different scale and a different capacity. It's the exact same thing.
So one question we have from Megan is there anything you wish you would have done sooner to better prepare yourself to pivot out of higher ed? I'll start this one. One of the things that, as I work with coaching clients, that I they come to me obviously when they've made the decision that they want to do something else, whether that's pivot out of higher education or move up into a different functional area. Don't wait until you're absolutely over your current role to think about what other things you might want to do, right? Don't wait till you've reached that breaking point that you don't want to do it anymore, that you're so frustrated or you hate your supervisor. Think about that now, even if it's just exploratory, right? Because I think what happens is if you wait till a moment of extreme frustration, then you really pigeonhole the potential opportunities that you have. And so a lot of times when I see in the expat groups, people think, well, I did admission, so the only other thing I can do is be a recruiter, or I can only go into talent and development because I've worked with leadership programs. There are so many other things you could do.
Mhm.
Just take the time to start exploring industries, roles. Informational interviews are beautiful, especially when you're not actively looking, because people will have those conversations. Martise, Anna, and I have those conversations all the time about people who are interested in the work that we do. You just have to make sure that you're not doing that at the last moment or when you're so frustrated, because that's only going to make the job search even harder and more debilitating, because you're going to feel so much more pressure around how many applications you've submitted or how many interviews you didn't advance to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you know, there unfortunately there's some folks that are like they're there already, right? And it's like you wish that you could go back and start that process. And so we all come at this in a lot of different ways. And for many of us, we're finding ourselves in a situation we never anticipated, being in. So we understand that this happens at any time. I think that approaching the process from a mindset of curiosity and possibility can be difficult when you're already feeling, like you're in a difficult situation. But I think the best gift you can give yourself is really to try to find a different sort of part of your mental and emotional space to devote to learning about different industries and different aspects of work with a perspective of openness and possibility. Because otherwise, if you're really coming at it from a place of really being in a rough state, when you read those job descriptions, all you're going to see is words you don't know, functions you've never done before, terminology that's unfamiliar. Whereas if you read that in a different mindset, you're like, ooh, I don't know exactly what that means. Let me look it up. There's curiosity, there's possibility there. Like maybe I can do this. And that's easier said than done. Fully acknowledge that. But I think that mindset shift is a gift to yourself and a gift to your future. It's an investment in your possibility. And, don't let the bad situation win and take that possibility away from you.
Yeah, pretty much everything everyone else has shared, except for just adding in more to what Anna has shared about being open to the possibility that it's going to be a risk. And then also, your worth, what it is that you can bring to the table. Because I honestly feel like there's nothing that I would have done differently. It's just that I listen to myself. And so that yourself. So I would say just listen to that voice. If something's telling you that you need to do something, don't second guess it. Just go ahead and go for it and explore those opportunities.
So as we think about closing, since we're just about out of time, what does work-life integration look like as an expat, and how does that differ from when you were on campus?
I will say, as a parent of young children, I have more flexibility now than I did in my on-campus role. And a lot of people kind of look at me very quizzically when they realize I went into strategy consulting for work-life balance and integration. But the reality is that, I know what I need to do to perform and contribute. And when and how I do that is up to me. So I know how I need to show up, and it's a matter of then everything else I can, flex to meet mine and my family's needs. So I am able to take my kids to the baseball game and pick them up and spend dinner time and put them to bed. And that's worth it to me. So I'm happy to log on later at night and do what I need to do. I will say, you know, at this point in my career, I know that to achieve the goals that I want, I am completely fine with working 50 hours a week. That may not be where everybody wants to be. And you kind of need to really understand what the expectations of the role and industry are and decide whether that works for you. For me, having this level of flexibility and still being able to make the kind of income that I want to make and do work that's satisfying and interesting is a great combination for me right now. At some point, if I decide that no longer fits my personal value proposition, then I might need to move on to something else. But I've really been able to meet my integration goals.
Yeah, I would say for sure that my work-life balance is much greater now that I'm no longer in higher ed. I don't feel the sense of burnout. And then I have learned the art of saying no and being okay with it. And being able to also just be more transparent. I got into my role right into closer to the time of COVID, before COVID. So my role is completely remote. So is there a sense of trust now, as well as a sense of accountability? So if I need to, articulate to my supervisor, say, hey, I really need to take care of this, that is okay. As long as I have that relationship with my supervisor, I no longer need to do like, let me say I have this, and when I need to try to sneak off and feel guilty and take time off. Now is really, as Martise, you've been working really hard. So take a comp day or do this, so I feel like there's more transparency and just feeling good about like your time is more valued and making sure that you're able to show up for your job.
Yeah, I would agree. My last portfolio on campus included things like Greek life, new student orientation, parent and family programs. My life was not my own. And I felt like I was constantly on call, and I was afraid to not have my phone with me because I didn't know what was going to happen, especially on weekends. Like Halloween coming up, that was a weekend that everyone knew was going to be a thing. And so it was hard to like live in the moment and be present. And especially being in a long distance relationship at the time, I would always have these feelings of guilt of when my partner would come to visit and I couldn't commit fully, or he had to come to an event with me. That's not what he was coming. Yeah. That was not what he was there for. And so now, obviously, as owning my own organization, but also in just the work that I do, I get to set my own schedule. If I have appointments, if I have to figure something out, I can do that. If I have to take my dog to a vet, there's no sort of having to figure out what does being in my button seat 9 to 5 look like. Because I think we've all realized that many of our roles don't require that at all. And I think I've been able to structure my engagements. I work predominantly with schools on the East Coast because my partner being a physician, he wakes up at 5 o'clock. So I get up with him, and my workday ends earlier in my mountain time because my clients are done earlier in their Eastern time. That allows us to have time together in the evening. That's why we moved to the same city. And so for me, that's really important to manage that, because I felt like my whole career in higher education, I sacrificed a personal life for a professional advancement. And now I wanted to take that me time, and I love it, right? Like it's exactly what I need at this stage in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I know we're out of time. So I first want to say thank you, Anna and Martise, for doing this. I know you get roped into a lot of expat things, and I've probably been a big proponent of that. And I apologize for monopolizing your time, especially in the evening. But your insights, your candor, the conversation, I think, has been really helpful as folks are thinking about these opportunities and these kinds of careers and what it looks like. We'll make sure to share your LinkedIn profiles in the follow-up email in case people want to reach out. I know that can be overwhelming at times, but I appreciate your willingness to engage with people. Hopefully everyone found this helpful and valuable. We have 2 more sessions in the month. One is a masterclass in all things resume transitioning, and the other is a workshop helping you with LinkedIn and utilizing LinkedIn. You've heard us all talk about that networking and those sort of social sites are a huge component of how we've been able to pivot and transition after leaving campuses. And so feel free to check those out. So thank you again, Martise and Anna. I really, really appreciate you both being willing to do this.
Thanks to you. You are the consummate example of paying it forward. You've put a lot of energy into this series, and it's been great to hang out with you both. And good luck to everyone out there. We are very empathetic to your situation, but it's not as scary out here as you might think. So have faith, stay curious, and hopefully some positivity as well.
Yes, thank you, Adam, for letting us be part of this. And just as Anna shared, this is pretty much, we still have the student affairs spirit at heart of doing the pay it forward, as that is the big motto that everyone has. But now it's just a different capacity. So again, thank you.
I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you all.
Bye.